What is going on, everybody, and welcome to part 3 of Sponge plugin programming. In today's part, we're going to be creating a account manager as well as a skill manager, and this is just going to be for creating the config files that are going to handle both the user accounts as well as handling all the skills that we end up creating later on. So first thing we want to do here is we want to go about creating these two classes. So in this config package that we created a couple parts ago, let's go ahead and right click this, create a new Java class. I'm going to call this first one Account Manager. Then I'm going to create another one here, and I'm going to call this one Skill Manager. Now both of these are going to have basically the same thing in it, so we're just going to start with the Account Manager here and most likely copy and paste what's in there onto the Skill Manager. And we want to go ahead and create a couple of variables here, the first one being a logger, private logger, and we want this org.slf4j logger, and we'll set this equal, or call this logger, and then a file, private file, and we'll call this account, or accounts file, import the java.io.file, and then we need a configuration loader here with a no type of commented configuration node. And we'll just call this one loader, just like we did in the Sponge Skills class. And then we also need a configuration node. So private configuration node, and we will call this the account config. We're going to be using this one in order to access values, change values, and everything to do with what's in this config file. And then the last variable we need is just a private variable that is Sponge Skills. Once all that is done, we want to go ahead and create ourselves a simple constructor here. So public account manager, and we want this to take in a single argument, which will be Sponge Skills plugin. So within this constructor, we want to initialize a couple of variables here. The first one being this plugin variable that we have here. And we want to go ahead and grab this .plugin and set this equal to the plugin that we're passing in. So what this is going to do for us is it's going to set the plugin variable that's located within this class and set it equal to the plugin variable that is being passed in right up here. And after that, let's go ahead and initialize the logger variable. Logger equals plugin.getLogger. And since this is currently not a function within the plugin class or the Sponge Skills class, let's go ahead and create that now. So right at the bottom here, let's do public logger getLogger. And we just want to simply return logger. And now that that's done, we should no longer be getting an error there. And now we want to go ahead and actually create the function that's going to be in charge of setting up the account configuration file. So let's go ahead and create ourselves a private void function here that's going to be called setupaccountconfig. And within here we want to go ahead and first of all initialize two variables, the accounts file as well as the loader variable. So the accounts file, we're just going to set this equal to new file. And we want the new file to look at the plugin.getConfig directory .to file. And I'll explain this in just one second. And within that directory, we want to go ahead and look for a file called accounts.conf. And let's go ahead and create this function here in our Sponge Skills class. Public path get config, and we're just going to return config dir. Now we shouldn't get an error there. So what this is going to do for us here is it's going to set this accounts file variable equal to a new file that is located at the config directory, which will be that Sponge Skills folder within our config folder, and it's going to look within there for a file called accounts.config. And regardless of if it's there or not, it's going to go ahead and set this equal to a new file object. And later on, we're going to be checking to see if that exists, and if not, we're going to be creating it. Now, we also want to go ahead and initialize this loader variable here. And we're going to set this equal to hocon configuration loader. And we want to go ahead and import the ninja.leaping.configurate.hocon1 .builder .set file to the accounts file that we just initialized right above this line. Now we just want to build it. This will go ahead and create us a configuration loader in order to save and load this config file. Now again, since we are dealing with file input and output here, we want to go ahead, surround the next part of code with a try catch statement. And again, we want to check for the IO exception. And we'll call this E. Import that. And again, just like last time, we want to log a message saying that we had an error setting up the account configuration. So now if an IO exception ever does occur, it'll go ahead and warn the person running the plugin that there is an error and that we can go about fixing that and knowing where exactly this error is coming from. So now within the try statement here, we want to go ahead, initialize the account config variable here, or the account config variable. So account config equals loader.load. So since we have the loader variable being initialized right up here and the file being set to the accounts file, it'll allow us to go ahead and grab ourselves a configuration node that's going to relate to the contents of this file. So we're going to be able to grab the nodes from there, look at them, view them, change them, whatever we need to do. So with that loaded, we want to go ahead and check to see if the accounts file is not, or if the accounts file does not exist. So if !accounts file .exists. So if this file does not exist, then we want to go ahead and create it. And just like last time, we're going to go ahead and put in a default value here. So let's go ahead and grab the node called placeholder and set the value equal to true. And again, whenever we go about changing a node that's within a config file, we need to save it. So loader.save, and then this takes one argument, which is the configuration node that we want to save. And in this case, it is the account config. Now the last thing we need to do is we need to go about actually calling this function. And we can just go ahead and do this right within our account manager constructor here. So setupaccountconfig like so. Once that is done, we want to go about actually initializing an account manager object. So let's go ahead into our spongeskills.java file here. And we want to create ourselves right at the top an account manager object. So private account manager. And now within our pre-init function here, we want to go ahead and initialize the account manager class to new account manager. And since I want to take in the Sponge Skills class, I want to pass in this. Since we are already within the Sponge Skills class, we can just call this, and then it'll be passed in. And we can go about using all the functions in here that we need to use. And the last thing I want to do with the account manager is go ahead and create a getter for it so I can access it from other classes. So public account manager, get account manager. And I just want to return the account manager object that we just created. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, the skill manager is basically going to be the same thing. So I'm just going to copy all of this and then paste it within here. I'm going to have to change a few things such as the class name here. So instead of account manager, we want skill manager. And same with the constructor. And I want to change the variable names here. So instead of accounts file, I want skills file. And then instead of account config, I want skill config. And same with these down here. Since I changed the name up there, I want to change it down here, as well as here, and lastly here. And again, with the account config, I changed this to skill config. And then this is skill config as well. And lastly, skill config here. And since we are not setting up the account config here, we are setting up the skill config. Let's change the name there, as well as here. And then one more thing, we just want to change the name of the file from accounts.conf to skills.conf. So once that is done, I want to go about doing the same exact thing I did with the account manager and doing it with the skill manager. So private skill manager. import it. Then I want to create a new object, skill manager equals new skill manager, pass in the sponge skills class, and then create a getter for it so I can go about using it elsewhere in the code when needed. Get skill manager and return the skill manager object we just created. So now if I save this and build it here, if we get no errors, it should say it was successfully compiled. And now if we go about actually running the server here, once it's done booting up, we should have 3 config files, the main config called spongeskills.conf, then the accounts.conf file, as well as the skills.conf file. And now if we go into the folder here, you can see that we have the accounts.conf that has the placeholder value set to true, as well as the skills.conf with the placeholder value set to true as well. And also we still have the spongeskills.conf file with the placeholder value set to true as well. So that is going to conclude this episode. So thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.